I want to start with the number, because if I don't, you're not going to believe the rest of it. $1 million, offered to me on a Tuesday in my own kitchen, by a man I had said maybe 4 sentences to in my entire life. His name was Adrian Kessler, and he'd moved into the house behind mine about 8 months earlier, one of those glass and concrete builds that went up where a perfectly nice little bungalow used to be, the kind of house that makes the whole block quietly resentful, without anyone saying so out loud. I knew him the way you know a rich neighbor, by the cars mostly, and the fact that his landscapers came twice a week and mine came never, and by the one time our paths actually crossed at the mailboxes, where he'd said, "You're in the yellow house, right, with the dog," and I'd said yes, and that had basically been the extent of our relationship. So when he showed up at my door on a random Tuesday evening in April, I assumed something was wrong. A dead pipe, a fence dispute, something practical. Instead, he stood there in a coat that cost more than my car, looking oddly uncomfortable for a man who owned half the block, and asked if he could come in and talk about something. And I said sure, mostly out of confusion, and he sat at my kitchen table, the same table I'd bought off Craigslist for $40, and said without much preamble, "I have a strange proposal, and I need you to hear the whole thing before you react." "Okay," I said, already bracing. "I need a boyfriend for about 6 months. Publicly, my family's, it's complicated, but essentially my grandfather controls a trust that's about to pass to me, and there's a clause that requires me to be, and I'm quoting the actual language here, settled and partnered before it transfers. He's old-fashioned in ways that used to include not caring what gender that partner was, until it suddenly mattered a great deal to him 3 years ago when I came out to the family, and now it's become this whole thing, and I don't have the energy to fight him on principle when I have 4 months to solve it practically." I remember just staring at him. "You want me to pretend to be your boyfriend?" "I want to pay you $1 million to pretend to be my boyfriend," he said. "I know how that sounds. I've rehearsed about 6 different ways to say it that sound less insane, and none of them worked, so I just decided to say the real version." "Why me?" "Because I don't have anyone else I trust not to sell this story to a tabloid," he said dry, and there was something almost embarrassing in the way he said it, like the honesty cost him something. "And because you're the only gay man I actually know outside of business contacts I'd never ask this of. I know that's not flattering. I know it sounds like I picked you out of convenience." "That's exactly what it sounds like." "I know," he rubbed his face, and for a second the polished exterior slipped and he just looked tired, ordinary, a guy in his 30s who clearly hadn't slept well in a while. "I'm not good at this, asking for help. I don't really do it normally. But I'm out of time and out of options, and you're the only person I could think of who I didn't feel like a total predator asking." I sat with that for a long moment, my dog snoring under the table, completely oblivious to the fact that $1 million had just been placed on top of it like a poker chip. "I need to think about it," I said, which felt like the only sane response to an insane offer. "Take the time you need," he said, standing, already halfway to compose again. "I know this is a lot. I'm sorry to just drop it on you like this." He left and I sat at that table for probably an hour, staring at the wood grain, doing math I didn't want to admit I was doing, my student loans, my mother's medical bills that never seemed to stop no matter how much I chipped away at them, the fact that I was 31 and still splitting rent with a roommate because my graphic design freelance work paid enough to survive but never enough to get ahead. $1 million wasn't just money to me. It was every worry I carried, solved in one signature. I said yes 4 days later, mostly because I couldn't come up with a version of no that made financial sense, and also, if I'm honest, because some small curious part of me wanted to know more about the guy who'd looked that uncomfortable asking for help. We drew up an actual contract, his lawyer insisted, with terms that felt absurd to read out loud. Attend a minimum of 2 family events per month, appear together at his grandfather's birthday gala, maintain a reasonable public presence, as a couple, no obligation beyond that, payment split across the 6 months with a final installment on completion. I signed it at his kitchen table this time in his glass house, feeling like I'd stepped into someone else's life. The first event was awkward in a way that almost made me laugh, both of us standing too far apart at a dinner party thrown by one of his cousins, neither of us quite sure how affectionate we were supposed to be, whispering logistics to each other like spies. "How long have we supposedly been together?" I asked under my breath, refilling my wine. 8 months, I told my grandmother of 8 months. I don't know why, it just came out. 8 months, and I've never met your family until tonight. "You're shy," he said. "Very private. It's very believable, trust me. Everyone already thinks I'm difficult to date." "Ah, you?" "Extremely," he said, and there was a flicker of real humor in it, the first genuine thing I'd seen from him since the kitchen table, and something about that flicker made the whole ridiculous arrangement feel, for 1 second, less like a transaction. Over the following weeks, something started happening that neither of us had accounted for in the contract, which is that we actually started talking. Real conversations, not logistics, about his grandfather, who it turned out he genuinely loved despite the old-fashioned clause, about my mother, about the strange loneliness of being surrounded by people who wanted something from you, which he understood better than I expected a rich guy to. He wasn't what I'd assumed. Underneath the glass house and the expensive coat was someone oddly awkward, someone who over-apologized, who genuinely didn't know how to ask for anything without a legal document attached to it, because that was the only language his family had ever taught him. "Can I ask you something?" I said one night, maybe 6 weeks in, sitting on his impossibly minimalist couch after another family dinner, both of us still in our nice clothes, tired in that specific way social performance makes you tired. "Do you have friends, real ones, not business contacts?" He was quite a second too long. "Define real." "Adrian." "Not really," he admitted. "It's hard when people know what you're worth before they know your name. You start assuming everyone wants something, and eventually you stop giving them the chance to prove otherwise." "That sounds lonely." "It is." He looked at me, something careful and unguarded crossing his face. "This is going to sound strange, given the circumstances, but you're one of the only people in years who's talked to me like I'm just a person. I know that's ironic, considering I'm literally paying you." "It's a little ironic, yeah. I mean it though. I forget sometimes when we're just talking that this started as a transaction." He looked down at his hands. "I don't love that I forget that. It feels like I'm cheating somehow, letting myself feel normal about something I engineered." I didn't have a good response for that because the truth was, I'd started forgetting too, and it scared me more than I wanted to admit. Somewhere between the second family dinner and the fourth, I'd stopped counting the days until the 6 months were up and started, without meaning to, looking forward to seeing him. It came to a head at his grandfather's birthday gala, 3 months in, the biggest event on the calendar, the whole extended family in one enormous room, waiters with trays of things I couldn't pronounce, a string quartet playing something I recognized from a movie I couldn't place. I was nervous in a way I hadn't been for the smaller dinners, and he must have noticed, because halfway through the night he found me by the bar and said, "Quiet, just for me. You look like you're about to bolt." "I'm fine. You're gripping that glass like it owes you money." I laughed despite myself. "Your family is a lot." "They are. I'm sorry. You didn't sign up for a full immersion experience." He glanced around the room, then back at me, and something in his voice shifted, got softer. "For what it's worth, you're doing better than anyone I've actually dated. Genuinely. That's a low bar, apparently, if I'm outperforming real relationships while being paid to be here." "Maybe," he said, "or maybe the bar was never the issue. Maybe it was always the people I picked." I felt something tighten in my chest at that, the specific ache of hopping for something you're not allowed to hope for, given the paperwork sitting in a drawer at my apartment with both our signatures on it. His grandfather found us not long after, a sharp-eyed man in his 80s who looked at me for a long, appraising moment before saying, "So you're the one who finally got him to bring someone to dinner?" "Something like that," I said, throat dry. "He's stubborn," his grandfather said, not unkindly, glancing at Adrian with an expression that had real affection buried under the gruffness. "Always has been. If you've managed to make him show up somewhere and actually smile, you've done more than most." Adrian's ears went faintly red, and he mumbled something about getting more wine, and disappeared toward the bar, and his grandfather watched him go with a small, knowing look before turning back to me. "He doesn't let people in easily," the old man said. "I don't know what your situation is exactly, and frankly, at my age, I've stopped asking questions I don't want honest answers to. But I've watched that boy build walls around himself since he was 22 years old, and tonight is the first time in longer than I can remember that I've seen him relax in a room full of people. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I didn't know what to say to that, mostly because it landed somewhere uncomfortably close to true feelings I hadn't let myself examine directly, and I excused myself not long after, telling Adrian I needed air, and stood on the enormous stone balcony overlooking a garden that probably cost more to maintain than my entire life, trying to figure out when exactly this had stopped being about the money. He found me out there 10 minutes later. "You okay? Your grandfather thinks I'm good for you." "He's not wrong," Adrian said, coming to stand next to me at the railing, close enough that our arms almost touched. "I know this wasn't supposed to be real. I know that. I've been very careful to remember the terms of the contract, mostly because I didn't want to be the kind of person who confuses a transaction for something else just because it's convenient for me emotionally. But He let out a breath, something between a laugh and a sigh. But I think I've stopped being able to tell the difference, and I don't know what to do with that, because I don't want you to feel obligated to have feelings that weren't part of what you agreed to. Adrian, my heart was going hard, the same reckless way it had gone in every quiet, dangerous moment of my life where I was about to say something I couldn't take back. I haven't been performing this for weeks now. I don't know exactly when it stopped being performance, but it stopped. He turned to face me fully, something hopeful and scared moving across his face at the same time. Say that again. Slower, I want to make sure I heard it right. I like you, I said. Actually, I like you, not the contract version, the real one. And it terrifies me, because I don't know how to separate that from the $1 million sitting in an account I haven't touched, and I don't want you to ever wonder if I mean it or if I'm just very good at my job. I don't wonder that, he said, quiet, certain. I haven't wondered that in weeks. How did you know? Because you argue with me, he said, and there was real warmth breaking through now, something unguarded I hadn't seen from him even at his most relaxed. You tell me when I'm being difficult. You've never once tried to manage me the way everyone else in my life manages me. If you were just doing a job, you'd have figured out by now that agreeing with me gets you an easier 6 months. You've never once taken the easy route. I laughed, unsteady, relieved. I guess consistency is a bad liar's tell. I guess it's actually just you being honest, he said, which is apparently a very rare quality in my life, and it took me way too long to recognize what that actually meant. He kissed me then, careful, like he was giving me every chance to pull away, and I didn't, and it didn't feel like anything written into a contract. It felt like every quiet want I'd been rationing out for months finally being allowed to exist in daylight. We told each other everything after that, slowly, over the following weeks. His fear that people would say I only stayed for the money, my fear that admitting real feelings would make the arrangement feel dirty in a way it hadn't when it was purely transactional. We talked to his lawyer about restructuring the agreement, not because either of us wanted to, but because we both needed, for our own peace of mind, to separate what was real from what had been paperwork. In the end, he transferred a portion of the money into an account for my mother's medical bills. Something I'd mentioned once in passing months earlier, and he'd apparently never forgotten, and I refused the rest, because by then it had stopped feeling like something I was owed, and started feeling like something that would always sit between us if I kept it. You don't have to refuse it, he said, the night I told him. It was never conditional on this becoming real. I know, I said. That's exactly why I don't want it anymore. I don't want to ever wonder on a bad day if some part of this started because I needed the money more than I needed you. I need it to just be us, no number attached. He looked at me for a long moment, something in his face I hadn't seen before, not surprise, exactly, more like a kind of relief he hadn't let himself expect. I don't think anyone's ever turned down money to be with me before, he said. For what it's worth, that's a better proof of anything than the contract ever could have written. It's been over a year now since that gala. His grandfather still brings up, every family dinner, some version of the night you finally smiled, and Adrian still turns faintly red every time, and I still tease him about it, because some habits from that first strange, contractual chapter of ours turned out to be exactly the ones worth keeping. I think about that first night a lot, sitting at my $40 table, my dog snoring underneath it, $1 million laid out in front of me like it was the biggest thing that could ever happen to my life. It wasn't, as it turned out. The biggest thing that happened to my life was a man who didn't know how to ask for anything without paperwork attached, slowly learning, over 6 clumsy, honest months, how to just ask for me instead.